I want you to think back to all those times ago when you used to be able to go visit different countries. We kind of took it for granted a bit, didn't we, that we could just jump on a plane and fairly easily go pretty much anywhere in the world. But that's come to a stop, and I was actually planning another trip this year with a group of young people over to the Philippines to go preaching. Where's Isaac? Isaac came with me last time. We went over to the Philippines. We had a great time preaching over there, and we tried to go again. We were going to go again last year, but of course that didn't happen. So then we said, maybe 2021 will be the year, and we tentatively put plans in place. But no, 2021 is not the year either. So this morning, I want to take you on a little bit of a tour back to a place where the 7 churches were or are that John wrote about in the book of Revelation. These were real places he was writing about in a real country, in a real place, and I want to take you there this morning on a little bit of a tour and just show you, I guess, some of the diversity amongst those churches, even though they're in what we call the same country today, the country of Turkey. I just want to show you a little bit of what remains of those cities from around the time of when John was writing his book, the book of Revelation, and I guess just make a few comments or come to some conclusions at the end about what it all could mean. So let's begin, and I want to show you a map. So here is a very rough map, and this is modern day Turkey basically. But what is labelled on there are the names of the 7 churches that you find in Revelation. So if you want to have a look in your Bible, you can go to Revelation, and you start the first 3 chapters talks about these 7 churches, okay? And here they are listed up here. And the first one is recorded in the Bible is the church in Ephesus. Then Smyrna, then Pergamos, then Thyatira, then Sardis, then Philadelphia, then Laodicea. If you notice the order that I talked about those on the map, did anyone notice what order I talked about those on the map? Okay, who's the observant ones? Call it out. How did I? All right, Charlie, I see you over there.
The one that starts with E and then S and then P and then T and then S and then P and then L.
You're correct. Now, what sort of shape does that make, Charlie? Clockwise. Makes a circle, doesn't it? Yep. Makes a circle. And so what this was, John was writing a letter. But back then, it was hard to write letters because today we can just do an email, I just type it and press send and boom, it can go to as many people as I want. I just got to type the addresses in. But John did not have email, but they did have a postal system. But the problem was that John didn't have a printer. So if he had to write something down, he had to get a piece of either maybe like papyrus or parchment both of those would have been common. So parchment is like dried animal skin. And he would have to write it out, the letter. He would have to write it out. And so if he was going to send it to 7 churches, he might have to write it out 7 times. Now that gets expensive because paper was a very expensive thing. Usually imported from down Egypt way, that was very common. So what he did was, he wrote an introduction at the letter. At the start of the letter, he wrote 7 little introductions to these 7 churches. Then he wrote his main letter, and then he signed it off at the end. And he gave it to the postal man, and he said, I want you to take this around to the cities, and I want you to deliver this letter to the churches in these cities. And the postal route, like the direction the postie would go, would be around in that direction: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. The postman would do a loop. And that's how they got the order. And that's why there's 7 little introductions, and then there's the whole letter. So the whole letter was for all of those 7. Each one got their own little introduction. So, It was written by John on the island of Patmos. Now, I reckon, some say John was in prison. I reckon he might have been on holidays. Because when I got to Patmos, it was a very nice place. And that was it. I took that photo from up at there's a monastery up on top of the hill. But John was imprisoned on Patmos. And we went across there on a boat on a Greek ferry. And it was severely overloaded. We were told we would get like a little cabin each for the night with where we could all sleep. And when we got on the boat, they said, well, actually, instead of there being like, if we were in a tour group, instead of there being like 25 cabins, we only have 5. And so I remember that night, I learned some things about Greeks, and I say this in respect, it's just an observation. The Greeks like coffee and cigarettes, and on that boat, everyone was smoking cigarettes, and my eyes were stinging from the smoke, and I was lucky enough to get one of the cabins, so I had a friend, so Libby and I were on the trip together, and a friend and his wife were on the trip together, and so I said, I tell you what, Libby and I will have the top bunk in this little cabin, because it just had a bunk, that's it, that's all it was, and you guys can have the bottom bunk. So we were on this little bed in this boat, couldn't even move. Lucky it was a smooth crossing. And through the night we travelled, and we got off here at Patmos the next morning, right on sunrise. And we had a look around Patmos. There's a little, just down in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture, there's a place down there where there's a cave. And tradition has it that's where John was when he when he got the vision and he wrote the book. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, we don't know. But this is certainly the island of Patmos where he was imprisoned. And locals say that even though it looks really good there, our tour guide happened to be, I think she was an Australian, this girl, or had lived in Australia for a while, who showed us around Patmos. And she said during winter, the seas can get very choppy, to the point where the boats can't even make it into the harbour there. It's just too rough to get in. So John, this is where he was imprisoned, and he wrote the book. So he first wrote to the church in Ephesus, and I'm not going to read each of the letters, because otherwise we'd be here by 2 o'clock still, I think, and that'll do no good, because Hayden's hungry already, aren't you, Hayden? Yep, that's right. I'll be hungry by 2 o'clock as well. Ephesus. So this is the first church. And here's a shot looking down one of the streets in Ephesus as it looks today. Has anyone else travelled to Ephesus? Yeah, Ray's been to Ephesus. Known to be quite a rich city, quite a large city as well in that day. Had in the background, like down, I'm pretty sure it was down behind that big building you can see at the bottom of the street, which is a library. The harbour was down that way. And the reason that people ended up leaving the city of Ephesus, the big city that it was because the harbour silted up, and then the mosquitoes got really bad apparently, and everyone was getting sick, and so they all kind of left. And so this great city, it had Christians in it in the early days. And here's the main street. You can see on this street here, there's some mosaics. So these are like little tile pieces. And people who were well-to-do used to make mosaics on the road. And even occasionally they would get tired of that mosaic and they'd tear it up and they'd make a new one. Whatever the fashions change, I guess. So mosaics. And that was another sign that it was a reasonably rich city. They also were known for having, at one period in time, having lights down the street. So they were like gas lights, I believe, that would light the streets at night, which was quite noteworthy in a city of that time. And here I am, and can anyone make out where I'm sitting? Yes, this is quite a piece of engineering, actually. That's why I put it in here, just to show you. Water ran through underneath there, and you could join your friends, and it was a communal kind of place to go. Probably not our idea of today of how we would like to get the job done. A little trickle of water ran in front of the seat there, so you could reach down with your hands there and you could wash your hands. So the water was running through there all the time to keep it hygienically clean. So the Romans were actually known for their ability to move water around through different aqueducts and pipes, and they were quite notable engineers, the Romans, and they had a fair bit to do in later times in the city of Ephesus. And here is the library. It was very famous for its library. I think they brag. I'm trying to remember what the number was. 12,000 or 16,000 volumes in their library. We think nothing of it today. We've got printing presses, and everyone's got a printer in their house, or maybe two, because when you run out of ink, sometimes it's cheaper to buy a new printer. Printing was a big deal, and this city was known for its library. Now over here is something that looks pretty boring, but it's actually got a bit of a story behind it. And I'm wondering, does Ray remember seeing any of this stuff? This was just off to the side of the city of Ephesus, the main city. So this is all that remains of one of the seven ancient, was classed as one of the seven ancient wonders of the world, and this was the temple of Diana or Artemis. And it was a very famous temple, and I'll fill you in just a little bit more of some of the story as it relates to the Bible in just a minute. But this building got burnt down, and I think, and you might have to check me on this one, there was a guy whose name I can't remember who lived in Ephesus, and he wanted to be famous. And he thought, what could I do to be famous? And he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll burn the temple down, and then everyone will know my name. He was a shoemaker, I think. So that's what he did. And everyone did know his name for about 3 days until he died, because they got a hold of him and finished him off. So that was the temple of Artemis or Diana, same god. Now, everywhere the Romans went, they built massive amphitheatres, and you can kind of tell where the Romans have been because there's amphitheatres there. And this is a massive amphitheatre that's in Ephesus. Now, there is something interesting about this. Here's just some pictures to show you how big it really is. If you stand like down at the front, I don't know if anyone's ever visited the amphitheatres. If you stand down at a certain point just near the front, you can talk in your regular voice, and people in the stands can hear you clear as clear. You don't have to yell or raise your voice to a high level. It's the angles, the engineering means that people can hear you. Does anyone remember anything notable that happened to the Apostle Paul in the city of Ephesus? And if you want to cheat, you can look at Acts 19. No, that was up on Mars Hill in Athens, that was, the unknown God. Does anyone know? Come on. Paul in Ephesus. What happened? No, it wasn't that. Let me see if I've got the actual verse. No, I do not. Acts chapter 19. Anyone want to have any more guesses? I hope it's Acts chapter 19, now I'm saying it. There was a riot, Pete. There was. And do you remember how the riot started? What was it? Paul was so successful in his preaching that he was preaching against the other gods. And the silversmiths, who had a big guild there, it was common to have a guild, a bit like a trade union, they were all joined together, and the silversmiths guild got really upset, and they started a riot. And they went into this amphitheatre, and they were rioting in there. And Paul, you know what Paul said? He said, let me go in there, I'll talk to him. They were all ready to, they're trying to wring his neck, they wanted to kill him. And Paul said, I'll go in and talk to him. And his friends are saying, no, you won't go in there. Do not go in there. And they kept him from going in, but they rioted there for a while, and some of the city leaders came and calmed them down a bit, and the whole thing got shushed down. But it happened right there in that amphitheatre. So real places, real people. And Paul was writing letters to Christians who were living there. There's some other markings in the city. I didn't put the photos in where you can see early Christian markings they've scratched into the pavement, into the roadway there. The fish symbol that was easily visible here in Ephesus. So that was the city of Ephesus, just a brief rushing by the city of Ephesus. The next one on the circuit, Charlie, do you remember what it was called?
No.
Smyrna. There we go. or if you're local, they sometimes call it Smyrna. I'm not sure whether the accent from our guide or whether we say it very differently in English. That was about all that we could see of Smyrna when we got there. We just sort of looked out of the bus window because it's a city that's still inhabited today. I'm just trying to find my little bit of notes here. So this is, Izmir, modern day Izmir is there. And Paul was talking to a group of believers who were in this city as well. So there were some famous temples there. They were, a bit of thing. They had some more silversmiths and goldsmiths there, and they near a seaport, and they were on the edge of a trade route. Busy sort of city, Smyrna. Paul writes to them as well. But that's about all we got left. Always, you can see from the time that John was writing about it in Revelation. Then we go to the third one, which was Pergamum. The main city centre for Pergamum was up on top of a hill. And again, can you see anything in the photo that might be a giveaway that the Romans have been there? Yep, big amphitheatre there. This might have to be the steepest amphitheatre I saw in all my travels, I tell you. If you fell over on the back seat, you'd be down the front in no time. It was very steep. And I'm looking from a place at the bottom here. The photo's taken from the bottom of the hill at a place called the Asclepion, and I'll come back to the Asclepion in a minute. But up on the hill, the Romans had even managed to get running water to the top of that hill, the clever Romans. So I don't know how they did it, but they got water up there. And here's some more of the engineering. And here is like the angle of the amphitheatre, just to let you know how steep it was. And that's from the top looking down. Down the bottom, in the middle of the photo, you can see like a row of like columns. That was the Asclepion. And the Asclepion is like a hospital. And so, if you were ill or pretty sick, so not quite like our hospitals today, but some similarities. If you were really sick and you needed to go to hospital, first you can see those columns, that's like a roadway there. Your family, your friends would drop you off at the front of the roadway, and if you could make it unassisted to the other end of the road, then you could come to hospital. That's the Asclepion. So this is part of the modern day, the start of and here's the roadway. There it is. If you can make it, and you can go to hospital. Now they had all kinds of things there, but here is one of the symbols at the front of the Asclepion, and it's a somewhat famous symbol today to do with medical things. Can anyone make out what it might be? On the ambulance symbol? Yep, so like you got the snake there. Does anyone, like diabetics sometimes wear the bands and they got the little symbol on them? Has anyone wear one of those? No, not here. Modern day hospitals, the serpent on the pole. This was back at the Asclepion. They had some other interesting things there. There was a tunnel. I don't know if I got the photo of the tunnel. No, I don't. There was a tunnel that they could walk the patients through, and they had these little peepholes at the top, and the people who worked at the hospital would watch them, and it was a dark tunnel, and as they come through, they try and scare them down through the hole to part of their treatments. There were water treatments and all kinds of things that happened in at the Asclepion. That was down the bottom of the hill. Here's the main water source at the top of the hill at Pergamum, and the Romans. Today, Ray, if you need to, level a site somewhere, you just push the dirt out and roll it down, and it's all done. Level the site.
Use a brick bowl.
What was that?
Use a brick bowl to slide out.
Yeah, that's right. Get the levels. The Romans, they didn't use fill. They used to build archways out. And they'd just build archways out and out and out, and then they'd build on top of the archways, build their cities on top of the archways to get their levels. And here on top of the hill they needed a bit more space, so they built their archways out and out so they could build on top of them. And they're still standing there today, well engineered. And here they are, all lined up neatly. And up on top of the hill, where these couple of pine trees are, there was something of significance there. Can someone read Revelation 2 verse 13 for me? And I'm just looking down here and I see a bag. I was going to do a kid's story, Baz, and I forgot all about it. Revelation 2:13.
Now where you live, Satan has his throne. If you remain true to my name, if you did not renounce your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives.
Yeah, so in the introduction to each of these churches, when John's writing, he mixes information about the city in which they live into their introduction. So God's given him insight, or he's been there, he knows things about them, and it's mixed into the introduction. Now, there was a reference there to where Satan has his throne. Is that what it said? And up where these two pine trees are, there used to be a big temple, and I'm just trying to remember this so I don't get this wrong. It was the temple of Trajan, I'm pretty sure. There was a couple of temples up there. Of Zeus. It might be Zeus, actually. One or the other. Anyway, let me show you a few more pictures to let you know what was happening there. These are big temples, big pagan temples. And in the 1800s, a archaeologist, a German archaeologist, came over and he saw the beautiful temple that was still there, what remained of it. So he spent a few years and he pulled the entire thing down piece by piece, labelled them all, and took all the pieces back to the Berlin Museum. And here, the only thing that's left is the steps going up to this temple. And if you want to look at it today, that is what it looked like when he got there, because that is in the Berlin Museum. Have you seen that, Rita? Yep. Yep. And I think there's one of the other temples there he's got pieces out of too, the temple to Athena. But this is what he took away, and you can go see it. So the reference here to where Satan has his throne, the scholars believe, hey, he was talking about the temple that was there. I know what's going on where you live. Satan's got his throne there. He knew. We'll move on. Thyatira. Again, when we travelled there, we sort of drove in the bus and we sort of drove around, saw this little thing bit, and then we kept moving. It's a city that's still inhabited to this day, and probably one of the clearest references in the Bible we've got to this city is in relation to a lady named Lydia. And Lydia was known as a dealer in purple cloth, and the way they made the purple dye was quite costly and expensive. And it's believed that Lydia, as one of the church leaders there in this city, in the city of Thyatira, was probably a fairly wealthy lady who was able to support the gospel work with her resources and her energy to make it happen. And so today it still remains a trade hub, but it produces different items just than purple cloth now. Some olives, olive oil it's famous for, and I think maybe some wines even in that area too. Again, these are all cities that are, near a port or on a trade route or something significant. Then there's Sardis, ancient city. I'm not going to go back into all the history, but just talk about the time when Paul was there. Paul visited and the apostles were around. Here's I think it was a little baptistry, this one. And this is some of the remains, still in very good condition. This was the gymnasium right in the middle of the city. So there was some people were living up at up on top here, like there's a big rocky outcrop thing just sort of sitting right behind the city, and then they sort of developed the farmland and things at the bottom. But if ever an attacker came, they would escape up to the top of this, and they'd hide out there, because it's very hard for an army to advance up those slopes and attack you when you're on top. You can throw things down and make their life very difficult, no matter how good of fighters they are. And so this is the gymnasium, what's left of the gymnasium, right in the middle of town. And this also had, it's not quite noteworthy, probably one of the biggest synagogues from that time period in any cities, all through Asia Minor. And here, the synagogue was roughly the length of a football field, certainly one of the largest in antiquity. A huge synagogue. So synagogues were places where the Jews met, and it would be highly likely that characters, the apostles, Paul, would have been here and stood here and talked with his fellow Jews and tried to convince them that, hey, Jesus was the Messiah in this very place. Now, there's another big temple just outside of town here with some photos of it, and there were some kids there too. This is something interesting I just want to bring to your attention. I like this story. Siege of Sardis. Sardis was captured by Cyrus. Have you ever heard of Cyrus before? Cyrus was named in a prophecy in the Bible 150 years before he was born. And part of Cyrus's campaign, he tried to capture the stronghold of Sardis. And they got there, and all the people, of course, escaped up to the top of the big rocky outcrop there. And he was offering big rewards for his soldiers to see who could, find a way up there to attack the city. They were camped around the bottom there, sort of nearby, looking on. Never been involved in the siege of a city, but I imagine there's a lot of waiting. And the guys up on top, the soldiers up on top, were just sort of, going about their business, laughing and yahooing. And one of the soldiers on top dropped his helmet, and it bounced all the way down the cliff, clonk, 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 and down to the bottom. Now, today, we might be able to get another helmet pretty quick and easy. Back then, they were all a handmade kind of thing. So your helmet's pretty important. And a few hours later, some of the soldiers at the bottom noticed that there's a guy picking up his helmet. They said, wow, how did he get down to get his helmet? And so they watched carefully as he disappeared back into the rocks, and from a distance, they watched how he climbed up there. So that night, at nightfall, some of the soldiers copied his route up there. They got to the top, found it basically unprotected, that route in. The main route was like well fortified, and the back entrance was pretty much wide open. And they marched the army over the wall there and conquered the city. And Cyrus took the city quite easily in the end, all because of a dropped helmet. So always do your strap up on your helmet, Charlie. It's the moral to the story. That was Sardis. Then we get to Philadelphia. Does anyone know what Philadelphia means? Yeah, it is a cheese, that's right. A delicious cheese. It's got another meaning though. It's got another meaning. Brotherly love, yes. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And it's interesting too, there's... as this letter is written to each of the 7 churches, they each get, something they're doing good. And Jesus tells them, he says, hey, you're doing really good at this. And then they get some rebukes, and they say, hey, but you need to pick up your game in something else. So each of them, they follow a very similar pattern. Philadelphia was the only city that there's no rebuke for. Like Jesus doesn't say, hey, you should, lift your game on something or other. He gives them a good wrap-up. Again, this is a city that's still lived into this right through to this modern time. And that's what the streets kind of look like. And again, you can drive around the streets and have a look around the city, but there's there's not a whole lot there. There was a guy with a horse and cart. I thought that was noteworthy, worthy of a picture. And in the middle of the city, we got out of the bus and we had a look through here, and this pillar thing is about all that's left of the ancient city about the time of the Romans. And that's it, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And then we get on to the last city. Does anyone know what this one's called? Laodicea. I was a bit shocked that our guide called it Laodicea. I was like, oh, maybe I've been saying it wrong all this time. So whether you say Laodicea, Laodicea, I don't know, but here it is, the city. And it was known as a very wealthy city. And here's a list that I took there of the important earthquakes in the history of the city. And you can see how many earthquakes, like it was a highly reactive, it's like the New Zealand of Turkey or something, I don't know, lots of reactivity under the ground. And you'll notice that in the letter to the church in Laodicea, it says, it references there, it says, this is the end of chapter 3 of Revelation, it says, you're rich and increased with goods, or you think you're rich and increased with goods. This city was, the earthquake shook it to the ground, I think about 27. The year 20, or it might have been a little bit later, 47 maybe. Anyway, one of those two. City was utterly destroyed. And the emperor wrote to the city leaders and said, how about I rebuild the city for you, I'll pay. They said, don't worry, we've got enough money, we'll do it ourselves. It was a rich city. And that's just one example of its richness. And you can see the layout there, fairly flat sort of site. And again, who's been there? The Romans got there, yep, the amphitheatre. And this is looking another way, and you're looking, it's not the best picture it was the best I could do under the circumstances, but right across the other side there's a valley, a nice big flat valley, and up the other side you can see something white on the other side. Can you make that out in the bad picture? What's that? Over here, you can see it over there. It's like that. It looks a bit like the White Cliffs of Dover, but it is not Dover. When you get over the other side, so this is now we've gone over to those white-looking cliffs, and we're looking back towards Laodicea. Can you see what's on the ground there? It looks a bit like salt. It's a mineral deposit. Have any of you bore water? Sometimes when you have bore water and it's hard water. Yeah, it's minerals. It's full of minerals. So water's gushing out of the ground there all the time, and it's the minerals just build up, and that's the white deposit you see, and it's actually nice and warm. There we are walking around in it. Some places there, like it's so hot you can't get in, like it's coming out of the ground like boiling hot water. And at the hotel they dug a bore and it was coming down in stages of pools, and you could work your way up to the pools, and you get up near where it was squirting out of the ground, and too hot, so you have to go down a few levels to the cooler pool and try and cool off. But out comes the water from this place. And if you're into science, it tells you all the pH and everything there on this sign. But here's what the Romans did, the clever Romans. The water was over the other side of the valley. So they said, we need water over in the city of Laodicea, so we'll pipe it across. And you can see here is a picture of, there's the pipe, and inside it looks like a great big, there's a great big build-up inside that pipe. And what they did, they piped the water from over the other side at Hierapolis, it's called. They piped it across the valley all the way over to Laodicea. When it left Hierapolis, it was boiling hot water. By the time it got across the valley all the way to Laodicea, how do you reckon the temperature was? It wasn't cold, it was lukewarm. And you'll see in the text, as you read the text here, there's a rebuke. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing, but you do not realise that you're wretched, pitiful, poor, blind and naked. And I'm trying to find out where it says lukewarm. verse 16. Yes, so because you are lukewarm, neither hot or cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. This is using the language or the imagery of what is in the city to help portray a message to the people that live there in words they'd understand. And the people had this lukewarm water that used to run into their city from the other side. Jesus builds on that and says, hey, spiritually, I don't want you to be lukewarm. I wish you were one or the other, hot or cold. Because lukewarm, I just want to spit you out of my mouth. And that was the water. They sometimes used to use that water to put on people's eyes for healing properties. Jesus says again, you need to buy the water from me. You need to get... I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. Jesus is saying, hey, I got the real stuff. There might be some healing properties in your water, but if you want real healing, come to me. Building on the imagery. Here's the streets. They're doing more excavations there all the time. But I want to just make some comments about some of the similarities that these 7 churches had. All of those 7 churches received the same letter, okay? You can read that letter yourself. It's in your Bible. It's the book of Revelation. That same letter, the guy who was on the postal route, he went round and he came to churches, and maybe they sat like this. Maybe they sat in a circle. Maybe they met at someone's house. He met with them and he read them the letter. He didn't read one letter to one church and a different letter to another church. They all got the same letter. They all worshipped the same God. They had heard the preaching about Jesus. They'd heard the gospel. The Messiah had come. He had lived and he died, and he had made a way for anyone who believed in him to join the kingdom of heaven. You didn't have to work your way in. You didn't have to say enough prayers. You didn't have to go to enough temple services. Jesus has made a way for you to have salvation. They'd all heard it. And they all, based on that letter that was read, they all had the same purpose. And you know, it's a similar purpose that we share as a church today in the 3 angels' messages that we find in Revelation 14. The everlasting gospel is to go to all the world. All things that were the same. All of those 7 churches. But there were also some differences. Every single one of those churches had a different appraisal. There were things that they were doing well, different to the other churches. All of the churches had different counsel. So the letters, the introductions all follow a pattern. And the counsel is different for each of them. Each of them, it says, hey, I counsel you, we just read Laodicea, to buy gold from me. Get your eye salve from me. That's their counsel. The other churches all had different counsel. All of the churches have a different promise. At the end of their little introduction there is a promise for each of those churches. Each of them had a different promise that was specific to what they were facing and their needs where they were. They all had different strengths and they all had different challenges. Each one of them lived in a community that was different from the others. Each of their cities had different reasons to exist. Each of their churches had different challenges. And their communities could all be, they face different things. And all have different members that make up their church community. In fact, no 2 churches are the same. Even though they've got the same mission, what they faced and the way they behaved, all 7 of them were very different churches. Different locations, different people, different places. Sometimes we ask today, why not have just one church? And sometimes the idea of unity is talked about as all being the same. But each church in Revelation is responsible to take the message and apply it to their own context. Because they live in different places, because they are ministering to different people, therefore, the way they do it, it would look different. I want to read to you in Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. And here is a small portion of the message to the church in Philadelphia. And what does Philadelphia mean? Brotherly love. Verses 7 and 8. Chapter 3, to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, "These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." Scholars like to talk about what the open door is that was before the Philadelphian church. But I'm thinking of those people who were sitting in the pew, hearing that letter for the first time. Here's some counsel to them. And maybe they did think back to the sanctuary, but I'm thinking they might have thought more closely to their situation right there and right then in the city of Philadelphia. The guys who are sitting in the pews may not have originally been able to see that. And I think if, as they're reading it, they could have also taken out the meaning that before them, in their city, they have an opportunity that other cities don't have to share the gospel. Before them was an opportunity that Ephesus didn't have. These guys were situated on a trade route. People came in and out of that city and were there for short amounts of time. If you were in a church, in a city where people came through, were transient people, in and out, what might you do to share the gospel? I think things like, for these guys, street preaching would have been a big deal for them. They get a short window of time to actually talk to people, and then they're gone. And in fact, the emperors knew that this city was that kind of city that had a transient population. And so they used to send a lot of their influential people there for the very purpose of trying to spread the ideas of the empire so that people would take it out to wherever they went. The Christian believers there had that same opportunity to share the gospel with people who were going out to all corners of the empire from their city. It was different to the opportunities at Laodicea, different to the opportunities of Ephesus. Each of them were different. So the New Testament, based on this, here's what I say. The New Testament advocates unity in core doctrines and diversity in the form of expression. There's some really cool stuff we do as a church that's all together. The fact that you can kind of go anywhere in the world and read the same lesson pamphlet is kind of a cool thing. At the end of the day, though, we have to keep in mind that our core mission is to take the gospel to all the world. That's why our church exists, the Three Angels message. It's a great mission. But the challenges that Bega Church faces are different to the challenges that Canberra Church faces, which are different to the challenges that a church in Nairobi faces, and which are different to a church in the Netherlands and what they face. And while we are completely united in our mission and in our core beliefs, the way we practice them and the way we live them out, we should expect to see some differences as we take the gospel message to all the world. The version of the Bible we read, it's no good me reading the German Bible reader. It's no help to me. I don't know German. It'll be hard for me to find Jesus there. But an English Bible I can read. We expect the Bible to look different. We expect the clothes we might wear to look different. When I talked to my island brothers this week, they're all going to dress up in Sulus. All the men will be Sulus. They want to wear their Sulus at Camporee. Sulus don't make sense in my culture. Doesn't mean one is right or one is wrong. But that's what they want to. That's what they want to wear. The way we keep Sabbath, yeah, we'll all keep the Sabbath, but it does look different in different cultures, based on a whole lot of factors that help people make that day a special day. What we eat. As I travel the world, some things that Adventists eat in some countries are different to other countries. It's not a threat. It might actually be a strength to us. And what my favourite music is. We can like different sorts of music and still be brothers in Christ and sisters in Christ. We should expect our churches today to look different as they function in different cultures, communities and conditions. Bega Church, you've got a community that you live in that's different to everyone else's. As you daily walk with Jesus and you remain faithful to the Scriptures and the gospel message that you've been given to take to all the world, the challenge goes out. How are we going to do that to reach the people of Bega? Pamphlet, that's one way. And I mean, it's no good me coming and saying, all you got to do...
Just stand on the street, hold them out.
Yep.
People grab them, they grab them.
That is definitely one way. But all of us have to wrestle with God in prayer and say, hey, what do you want from us, God? Like, as a community, as me as an individual, what's the best way that you want us to share your gospel message? And he has given out gifts, many different gifts to many different people in this congregation. And they're all used for the same thing, building up the church. If you've been gifted to, there's others who've been gifted to pray, but do it, work together.